Hi everyone, my name is Katie Martin. I work for the Center for Excellence in Disabilities, specifically with Autism Services. I am a board certified behavior analyst, and today we will be talking about understanding challenging behaviors. This will be a two-part webinar, so this is part one, and the next part will be available soon. So to let you know a little bit about myself, like I said, I'm working for the Center of Excellence in Disabilities. Through Autism Services there, we have some great programs that are currently going on, including social skills groups, small group parent training, and large group parent training. So if you're interested in those things, make sure to reach out to me, and you can either send an email or call me, and I will make sure to get back to you with any information that you are needing. Also, a lot of information is always posted on our Facebook page for the Center for Excellence in Disabilities, as well as on our website. We'll go ahead and get started with today's information. If this looks familiar to you, you are definitely in the right place. We will be talking about how to change behavior, and with that, behavior comes in all different shapes and sizes. So if your child or an individual in your life is struggling with a behavior that you'd like to change, you are in the right place. A little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today is what exactly is challenging behavior, what are the ABCs of behavior, and what is that first step that we need to take when wanting to change behavior. When does a behavior become challenging? So by my definition, a behavior becomes challenging, or a behavior that we would want to target to change, is when it starts to impede learning and adaptive behaviors, or causes injury or harm to self or others. So sometimes kids engage in behaviors that are minor, or they don't interrupt their daily life. We can still definitely work on changing these behaviors, and sometimes that's really important to do. I just consider it a challenging behavior when it starts to impede their daily life, and they're losing out on opportunities because of this behavior. I say injury or harm, and that's because maybe it's not happening every day, but it is causing harm to them. And it goes the opposite way. Just because it's not causing harm to someone doesn't mean it's not a challenging behavior. And why we want to change these is because there are some risks to letting them continue or not treating them. So some of the things that these can include is a loss of inclusion opportunities with typical peers, or not typically developing peers. So by this I just mean if they're engaging in behaviors that are really intrusive, especially in the school environment, they may start to lose out on opportunities because it's unsafe for them to be around other kids, especially if the challenging behavior is aggression towards peers. Other things can, like limited exposure to new places or experiences. A situation that describes this well is if you have a child that is frequently engaging in challenging behaviors to the point where it makes it difficult to go out in public, the family may not go out to eat as much. They may not go to parades or Chuck E. Cheese's or fun places that they would go if that behavior wasn't present. So when these challenging behaviors are present, it's really important to change them so that the kids or the adults don't lose out on these new opportunities. Another one is ineffective relationships with others. Sometimes this is just because the challenging behavior makes it more difficult to be around this child safely. So if the child is injuring other people or injuring themselves, it may seclude them to only caregivers that can be trained to deal with these behaviors. It may make it more difficult for them to connect with their peers. So because of these things, it's really important that we look at these behaviors and we decide how we're going to change them and improve the individual's life. So we'll get into why this is happening. And like I said, this is two parts because it is somewhat complicated and I want to make sure to fully explain it. And there's definitely some steps to take first and some things to understand first before we actually start attempting to change behavior. So what happens before and after the behavior? This is what we consider the ABCs of behavior change. And it's really important to understand these things, like I said, before we begin attempting to change behavior. So we'll go through each one. A is the antecedent, and all that means is it's what's happening before the behavior change. Or the behavior, sorry, not the behavior change. Then the B stands for behavior, and that's the behavior that we're specifically targeting for change. So this is not just any behavior that the individual engages in, it's the behavior that we're specifically looking to change, the challenging behavior. And the C stands for consequence. So this is what happens after the behavior. So we will be going through each of these in more detail, but I just wanted to first put it out there what each one stood for. So we're going to talk about antecedent first. The antecedents occur immediately before behavior, like I said. Sometimes these are called triggers. Triggers wasn't part of my vocabulary while I was in school, so I often use antecedents, but I've heard triggers be used frequently, so I wanted to include that here so that we can, so if you've heard that before, we're talking about the same thing. Some examples of these might be lack of attention or possibly too much attention. It could be difficult or long tasks, or denial of desired item or activity. So that could be telling them, no, they can't have the iPad, no, they can't go to the park, no, they can't run across the street. So basically, anything that's happening before the behavior or what sets the scene for the behavior. So the most important part about this is to understand that antecedents do not have the power and they do not cause behavior. So, like I said, they set the scene for us. They let us know that it is more likely that the behavior may occur, but they don't tell the whole story and they aren't what we're specifically going to be looking at to find the function of behavior and start to change behavior. So, they are important and we do look at them, but they are not what causes the behavior. So the next part is B for behavior. And this is anything that an individual engages in. And like I said, it can be something big, it can be something small, it can be something that's harmful to others or themselves, or it doesn't have to be. So examples could be aggression, self-injury, crying, screaming, running away, hand flapping, anything that you are no longer wanting the individual to engage in because it's intruding or hurting that individual's life in some way, and decreasing that behavior would make their life better. So C for consequence. This is what occurs immediately after a behavior. In other words, what the behavior gets done. You'll hear me say that a lot, especially in part 2 of the webinar. It also increases the future occurrences of other behavior, or sorry, not of other behavior, increases future occurrences of the behavior that we're targeting. So with this, it's really important to remember that consequences don't specifically mean something bad happened by our definition. So in our examples below, I do say that it could be attention in the form of stern looks or reprimands, but it could also be attention in the form of saying, okay, fine, we'll go play. It could be access to favorite items, so it could be something good. So maybe they get the candy, or maybe they get hugs to calm them down. So consequences doesn't mean something negative as we typically would see something. So just keep in mind that consequences just means that it happens after the behavior. So now what? We know what the ABCs are, but why do we need to know this and why is it important? What are we going to do with it? We're going to take data. Don't let this scare you. A lot of people say, I don't want to take data. It takes too much time. I don't really need it. I just want to work on changing the behavior. But to be able to change the behavior, we need to write things down because that's going to tell us what we need to do to change the behavior. So this is a very simple data sheet that I typically use. As you can see, the before is in the first column, the behavior is in the second column, and the last column is telling me what happens after. So that's strictly the A, B, and C. the important part to remember is that you don't have to have a fancy data sheet to do this. So if you want this data sheet, I would be happy to send it to you. Just email me and I'll email it back to you. But you can make it yourself. You can grab a piece of scratch paper or notebook paper and write A, draw a line, B, draw a line, and C. And within those columns, take your notes. Some people like it better to have something very specific to be writing on, and that's great and that's fine. I just want to make it very clear that that is not how it has to be, and it can be as informal or formal as you would like it. Again, the important part is that we're focusing on the consequence. And I always say that should never really be blank. And if it is, it doesn't do me too much good to have that. So really make sure we're focusing on that last column. Of course, the other columns are important, but try not to leave that one out. So some tips are write down what happens immediately after the behavior. It's very easy to say, I'll write that down later, or say, I'll just go back to the day and write everything down that occurred that day. But it's always surprising how bad our memory is. So I really try to have people write it down immediately after. And if that's not an option, then I typically tell people to just not use it. Just don't write it down later, because most likely you may have not remembered something correctly, or it just gets a little bit messy. Now with technology, it's somewhat helpful because people typically have their phones near them, so maybe they don't have paper and pencil, but they have their phone, so they'll make a quick voice memo of what happened, or they'll type it in their notes, or they'll put it in a text message and send it to somebody, so that it's written down and they have it, and then they transfer it to paper to all be in one place. That's great. Just try to make sure that you're recording it immediately so that we have the most accurate information. A lot of times, another issue is that people are recording the child's behavior as a consequence versus their own behavior. So, like I have here, it says, what did you do immediately after the behavior? So I don't want to know what the child did. So an example of this might be is somebody says, the antecedent was we were at the store, the child wanted candy, I said no. The behavior was the child threw a huge tantrum. And then in the consequence, somebody would write, the child calmed down in the car after I put him in his car seat. That's great. I'm so glad that he calmed down. But the important part is, what did you do after the behavior occurred? Or what did whoever was taking care of the child at that time do? So did you give him the candy? Did you tell him no again? Did you walk him out to the car quickly and leave your groceries? What happened immediately after that behavior? I also mentioned that if they are alone when the behavior occurs, you can still write that down. This is much less frequent, but go ahead and do that. So an example of this would have to be very specific to nothing happened. And in that case, I still typically tell people to write that down. So if the child was in the other room, your antecedent is, I was working while the child was in the other room playing. The behavior is toys are thrown across the room. And the consequence is, I did not get up out of my chair. I did not say anything. I did not look in the other room. I continued my conversation when I was on the phone. So pointing out that nothing happened. A lot of times we think nothing happened, but really you looked into the other room just to double check that everything was okay, or you stopped talking momentarily. And those are things. So make sure to do that. Or write it down that you momentarily stopped talking on the phone to make sure things were okay. Those are just some quick tips that people often run into problems with. So what happens before and after? We are going to go through a lot of examples, and that is solely because a lot of times people struggle with, I don't know what it looks like. What should I be writing down? How much do I have to write down? What are some things that you would put in the antecedents versus the consequences? So we're going to go through a lot of examples. And even after this, if you have any questions, make sure to email me. Even if while you're working on data, you say, this situation keeps happening, I don't know what is supposed to go where in my data sheet, give me a call and I can always try to figure it out with you so that you have better data, especially before going on to our second webinar. Another thing that these examples help talk about and explain is that behavior doesn't come out of nowhere or happen out of the blue like some people think or say. I hear that a lot. It just happened out of nowhere. Nothing was going on. I didn't do anything. It just happened out of nowhere. And writing this down and truly trying to think about what happened before and what happened after and forcing yourself to write it down often shows patterns that we didn't see before. It often shows that, okay, it did look like it came out of nowhere, but really these things keep happening before or they keep happening after. So that is why we take this data also. So on to the example. A might be the child is playing alone and I'm talking on the phone. That's all you have to write. Behavior is he comes and hits you, and you say, okay, let's go play. So maybe you had been working for a long time and he came over and hit you and he said, fine, 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 just stop. We're going to go play. I'll work later. So just write that down. There's no right or wrong response. Nobody is saying, oh my goodness, you shouldn't have done that. He just hit you. How did you not get him in trouble? That is not what this is about. This is about being accurate with what is being done before and after a behavior occurs, so that once we get to that second part, we are able to focus on behavior change appropriately. Another example might be the child is playing with his sister and I was working. He hits his sister and I yelled from the other room. I said, don't do that, and his sister cries. That is great information. Again, in our next, I put red boxes on this so you stay focused on what we're going to be talking about next time. But make sure there's something in that consequence box. So if we're filling out the data sheet like I used before, I have my A, B, and C columns. You can put something simple like playing together with cars, throwing objects, and you said don't do that, you need to calm down. If there's more information, maybe you said that while also giving the child a hug, write that down and include it. So there's lots of information that are lots of things that often occur when you say, I don't know what part to write down. Her examples were really short, so should mine be short? I always say, typically can't give me too much information, so write down whatever you think is important. So some more examples, you might say time to clean up your toys, the child tantrums, and you ended up cleaning the toys. So this one shows that I want to bring you back to the antecedent a little bit here. Is you had said to clean up the toys. So in the consequence section, try to include what happened with that original statement of what you told them to do. So did they have to end up doing it or not? But also include what happens after. So maybe you said, why can't you just clean up your toys? We do this all the time. The child cried more. You gave them a hug, sent them to bed, and you ended up cleaning up the toys. It's fine to include all of that information. That way I know they also got some attention from you, and they ended up not having to clean up their toys. My point with that is just try to include the information of, did they have to follow through with that demand, and what other things happened around getting to that point. Same thing, time to take a shower. The child started engaging in self-injury, and they didn't have to take a shower that night. You told them to go to bed. They had to go to bed immediately versus getting time to shower and time on their iPad possibly. So with this one, I do talk about self-injury. I don't think I've mentioned this yet. I talk about self-injury and aggression a lot through these examples, but I really would like people to be mindful of the fact that if your child or individual that you're working with is engaging in very severe behavior, especially things that can harm themselves or others, please contact a BCBA or someone trained to handle severe behavior. And don't try to change behavior solely on your own. The reason I say that is because sometimes when we try to change behavior, it can get worse before it gets better. And if you are not comfortable with that, or you are not able to handle that behavior intensifying before it gets better, it can quickly become unsafe, and I don't want to make any recommendations that put people in that situation. So please make sure to reach out to somebody. You can reach out to me if you're needing help. I just want to make it clear that this is not for every child, and this is not for every individual wanting quick behavior change. So back to where we were, again, really focusing on those consequences and telling me whether the original demand was followed through with or not. Food is a really common thing that individuals struggle with. So the behavior might be something like wiggling, like we just said. It doesn't have to be aggression or self-injury or crying and screaming in huge tantrums. It can be something simple like wiggling and getting out of a chair. But this becomes very challenging behavior when the child is no longer eating, or they're interrupting dinner time every night. You aren't able to go out to restaurants. The child isn't able to eat in the cafeteria because they run around the whole time. So something as simple as wiggling out of a chair can become something more severe. Because they're losing inclusion opportunities, they're losing access to new environments, things like that. So the consequence might be I removed the food and I presented more preferred food. These are some of the last examples. You're walking through the store and the child wants the candy. They have a tantrum and you got him the candy so he would calm down. Again, drawing it back somewhat to the antecedent of did he or did he not get that candy. Also include, did you say anything? Did you tell him no first? And then he ended up getting the candy. So include as much information as you can, but it doesn't need to be a paragraph long each time. Example, your time is up on the iPad, go play with something else. He started hitting me, and he was then allowed to play on the iPad for 5 more minutes. Or maybe the iPad was immediately taken from him, he was told no, and sent to his room. Either option is fine, just write down exactly what happened. Told no to buying new toys, the child cries and screams, and told her, okay, if you wait, and if you're good the rest of the time, then you can have a toy at the front of the store. So that's another example that occurs frequently. So hopefully those examples were helpful in letting you know some common things that are often written down, but that doesn't mean that's what you're writing down. Always contact me if you have any questions about what you should or should not be writing down, or if it's making sense. Main point is look at what's happening before and after and write it down. Writing it down helps so much to start to see patterns, to start to look at different things, to give your behavior analyst a starting point of what's happening. So that's really, really important. If you have any questions, this is my email address. You can also call the Center for Excellence in Disabilities and ask for me specifically. And I hope to hear from you soon if you have any questions. And if not, the follow-up webinar, part 2 of Challenging Behavior will be available, where we will talk about functions of behavior and then using that information to change the behavior. So thanks.